Conversation with the Candidate continues.
Thank you for watching our extended conversation with the candidate with Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, a 2020 presidential candidate on the Democratic side. We're going to jump in with our questions in this town hall format with New Hampshire voters right here, and we're going to start with Connie Evans.
Good evening, Senator.
Hi, Connie.
We have a growing list, growing by the day, of Democratic candidates. How do you set yourself apart from the rest?
I'm the only one that announced in a blizzard, in a foot of snow. I thought that you guys would like that in New Hampshire. I also am from the Heartland, a very important area, and I am someone that likes to get things done. I don't think you should be running for president if you don't have things you want to do and you aren't able to show how you're going to pay for it and you don't have a plan for getting it done. And that's what I've tried to do with every job I've had, and that's how I govern. So that's something that's really key for my candidacy. I'm also someone that loves people, and I like getting out there, and I think that's important not only in a candidate, but also in a president.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Another social media question coming in here from Lynn Lowell.
Okay.
She asks, what is your stance on UBI, Universal Basic Income? Many candidates are actually looking into this.
Sure. I think stepping back from these specific proposals, I think that the most important thing we need is to make sure that people who work hard in this country are able to make it in America, and that people who need help because something goes wrong in their life, like addiction or mental health, are able to recover, or people that have disabilities, we are watching out for them. And right now in this country, we have a situation where the game is not fair to so many people. And while our economy has gotten stronger, you look at what's happened since the downturn, and that's because of our businesses and our workers, and people have done a very good job, and some policies were put in place to steer us in the right direction. It is still not shared prosperity to the point that we'd like. And so these are some things that I would do. I would increase the minimum wage. It has been stuck federally where it is for something like 10 years. It's a little over $7 an hour. I would also make sure that we are doing a better job with paid family leave and child care for our country. I would make sure that our public schools are funded and that we are really focused on helping kids to get degrees in jobs that we have now. And that means why I'm such a big fan of one-year degrees and two-year degrees, because there's a lot of kids that would normally just go off the grid or maybe not even graduate from high school. And I think that that's the way to go when you look at the needs in our economy. We need people with four-year degrees. We need engineers. We need people with PhDs. So all we can do to get people who are not really feeling like they're part of this economy, maybe they've had a hard family life, whatever the issue is, to go into those areas like technology, engineering, math, science. That has got to be one of the key focuses in what we do here. I would also make sure that people have retirement. I'm a strong believer in Social Security, of course, but for a lot of people that's not enough. There are 49 million Americans right now that don't even have retirement outside of Social Security. That is a lot of people. And more young people are going into jobs where they don't have a 401k, or maybe they're working at a small employer. So I put forward a proposal, actually with another senator from Delaware, Chris Coons, just 2 weeks ago, and it's called Up Savings Accounts, and it's something I'd want to do as president. And what it does is it says that if you're working at a place that doesn't have a 401k, that you should be able to start saving for your retirement. And it puts about 50 cents an hour into an account. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is $600,000 by the time someone retires. And it is something that you can get if you are a part-time worker. It is something you can get if you change jobs. And here's the best part. As you know, a lot of people don't have emergency expenses. 4 out of 10 Americans couldn't afford a $400 emergency room visit. The first $2,500 each year would go for emergency expenses if you need it, if you can show you had them. You can take that out each year. It's really getting at the issues we have right now for savings because the world is changing. It is paid for because I've told you I show how I'm going to pay for stuff. It is helpful with very important tax credits for small businesses, and that is taken for ones that are under 15 employees, ones that are under 30 employees, and that is taken care of. It doesn't include the very smallest, under 10 employees. But that is taken care of by repealing parts of that tax bill we just talked about and putting that money toward these tax credits to help small businesses, to help them help their employees have a retirement.
Next question comes from Mary Woods.
Yes.
Good evening,
Hi, Mary.
Senator. Welcome.
Thank you.
As president, what would you do to redevelop our rural areas and our small towns that have lost jobs and population to this global economy that we're in?
Very good question, because I think we all know that there's really good things about living in rural America, and actually the cost of living is less there as long as you're able to have the amenities to live there. And I believe that kids that grow up in rural New Hampshire or in any rural area of our country should be able to stay there. So what do they need? Well, they need to have health care, and that means rural hospitals, including our critical access hospitals. That means things like broadband, rural broadband, which, by the way, if they have hooked up the entire country of Iceland, which is really a kind of a tough place with a lot of mountains and stuff and glaciers, please tell me why we couldn't do this, and volcanoes, that we can't do this in New Hampshire and in our country. And New Hampshire's actually done some good things with broadband, but there's much more that we can do. It means having economic development. And unfortunately, this administration has really not done enough when it comes to that Rural Economic Development Fund, really important in New Hampshire. You have some farms, of course, but you don't have as many as some states. And so that economic development piece of it is really key. Doing things that just make it easier for people to live in rural America. And the last thing I would add is this policy I've rolled out on mental health and drugs. Rural America has been hit hard with drug addiction, and that includes opioids. New Hampshire's in the top 5 states, but it also includes meth and other kinds of drugs that hit communities of color particularly hard. I have proposed this because of personal experience myself with my dad, who struggled with alcoholism his whole life. He had 2 DWIs when I was in middle school, and then he got his 3rd when I was just about to get married in the 90s. And that was when the rules changed, and you could choose between jail or treatment, and he chose treatment. And our family was there, and I told him what it was like growing up when I had to take the keys away from him when he was driving drunk, or when he wasn't there for graduations. And through the whole thing, I love my dad. I think it's made me a better legislator because of that, and a better president I will be, because I get that you can make mistakes and you can still work with people and still try to find common ground. But it's also helped me to come up with some ideas on how we can fix this and make it better. And that includes taking some of those money from the opioid companies that have made money off of rural America and made money off of getting people hooked by putting that money into treatment. And that includes beds for opioids, but also beds for treatment for mental health and other problems that people have. We went from this institutions, state hospitals, to community-based. The intention was good, but then we don't have the beds to help people. And it's our police officers, go talk to any of your officers in New Hampshire, who are on the front line, who have to be the cops and the doctors trying to deal with this, as opposed to getting people help on the front line. So that is something that isn't always talked about when people talk about rural America and what we need to do, but I think that's a major part of it, in addition to the infrastructure and the water, something you know well here, and sewer, and making sure we've got the rural broadband and the infrastructure in place, and the schools and everything else. So I've had a lot of fun going around rural New Hampshire with our family. We spent the Easter weekend cruising around up to Littleton, to that candy counter. We went to Walpole, went to Easter Sunday Church in Walpole. It was so beautiful. Then we went out to Miller State Park and made the maybe too early decision to scramble up that trail I want to get this right now. Is it Pack Monadnock. I got it right? Almost? Okay, no, come on, tell me.
No.
Monadnock. Okay, so close, so close. And so we scrambled up the Wapak Trail when maybe we should have walked up the road. There was a lot of mud and some snow, but we got to the top and it was beautiful. So I not only care about it from a policy standpoint, I love rural America, and that's why I am going to be here a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. 2 points for attempting the pronunciation there. That was.
Oh, come on, I was so
tight-
close.
I don't know if anybody else would have even gone there, so
I
congratulations.
can do Winnipesaukee.
There you go. Okay, next up is Leonard Morrill.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to give you a quote that you made and ask you a question about it. Your quote is, "If Congress continues to sit on its hands and the drug companies continue to stash cash in their stockings, Americans will forever be bound in the Jacob Marley-like chains of high prices." What have you done in Congress to change that perception?
I'm just laughing. I remember I wrote that, and it was an editorial I wrote about the ghosts of coming back with Jacob. There was actually more to it than just quoting Jacob Marley and the ghosts of Christmas past, and the Grinch. I was making them the Grinch, and I was making them, of course, Scrooge as well. So the whole idea here was that we have to move on this, and I think there are too many people in this Washington that coddle up to the pharmaceutical companies, and they may think they own Washington, but they don't own me. And part of this means, how do we get more competition? I passed out some ideas for this, but it is bringing prices down by unleashing the power of 43 million Americans to negotiate Medicare. It is bringing less expensive drugs in from other countries. In my state, we can see Canada from our porch, and we see what they have the prices up there. And then another thing that is really outrageous is that right now pharmaceutical companies pay generics to keep their products off the market. So by the way, you can have generics, good American pharmaceutical companies. They shouldn't be paying each other to keep their products off the market, because the one that loses are consumers. That would save about $3 billion in just a 10-year period. That is a Congressional Budget Office score neutral body. And that is a bill I have with Senator Grassley, Republican from Iowa. And there is a lot of interest on both sides of the aisle, but you need a president that's going to use the bully pulpit of the White House to push this through. And the public is so on our side on this that we're going to be able to get it done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank you, Leonard. Next question comes from Joan Krimlisk.
Hello.
Hi, Joan.
I was wondering what your agricultural federal policy improvements would be for small rural farms.
Oh, sure. Really, thank you. I care a lot about farms. I grew up not too far from farms, and spent a lot of time with my friends whose families had still relatives on farms. So I love small farms. And one of the things we've seen, sadly, especially with dairy farms in this country, is more and more of them closing down. And that is why we have the Farm Bill. And it's not a perfect bill, but it's really important to nutrition. And it's also very important to make sure that we have conservation. The Farm Bill is actually one of the biggest sources for conservation programs in this country. And the last part of it is, of course, farming. And I think one of the things that you need to do is make sure the money is targeted to the small farms. If you look back at my record, you're going to see a very interesting fight I got in when I was a brand new senator, when what I did actually passed like a decade later, but it was to focus the money on the small farms when it came to the crop insurance and things like that. And there was an editorial in the New York Times commending me for fighting it, saying that, but I sadly lost to 26 big rice farmers or something like that. I don't know what it was, but it was about trying to target it so that money didn't go to the Beverly Hills 90210 area code. And I say this not because I am against farming by any means. My state is 5th in the country for exporting agricultural products, and we have small farms, we have big farms. But I think it is very important that we have a structure in place so that we have a safety net for our farmers, but we make sure that we target what they need and target the farms that need the help. And the other thing about this is making sure over the years we've included fruits and vegetables and other types of products, and that's also very important as well.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you, Joan. Next question
Yeah.
comes from Nathan Cooper.
Hi, Senator.
Hi,
Thanks for
Nathan.
being here.
Thank you.
This question, I have a lot to deal with because I have a young son and I'm also a public high school teacher by trade. So
Thank
I
you
was,
for doing that.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And my question is, what role do you see the federal government and the Department of Education playing within education if you're elected president?
Well, we know that most of public education funding is through the states, but the federal government plays a very important role, and that is pushing policy and making sure that we are watching over so that all our kids get educated. And what I would do is look at our public education system and make sure it is best as possible and it's getting funded. I speak from the heart. I went to the public schools, K through 12. My daughter went to K through 12 public schools, and my mom taught second grade until she was 70 years old. And she loved it, and I still have people that come up to me and say she was their favorite teacher. So for me, public schools are really the basis for how we are, what we do as a country. That means making sure that teachers are paid well, and there's some really good proposals out there for doing that. It also means that we are funding things like special education, because when we tell states they have to do things and then the money doesn't follow, that is a big problem. We had some wrong turns a bit here and there, or at least with good intentions. This was before my time with the No Child Left Behind. Interestingly enough, my whole Minnesota delegation, and I would have been with them if I was there, opposed that bill, Democrats and Republicans, because they saw what was ahead, which was, despite the good intentions and some good things in the bill, it was doing over-testing. It wasn't actually measuring what we needed to measure. And I was glad that we made the changes recently with our new bill that amended that bill and got rid of some of the bad parts of it, that actually gave more power to local schools and measured what we should be measuring. So those are all things. There's been some good work done recently, but I think one of my passions, as you can tell, is to make sure these kids are graduating and they're getting degrees eventually in the things where they can work and be happy. And part of that means better partnering with our community colleges in the high schools and allowing classes to be taken and making sure then the high schools aren't robbed of their money, but that we find a way to do it that works for everyone. And that means it means allowing these kids to go to those classes. It means apprenticeships. We can do this because it's better for our country to do it that way. Is there something else you asked? Did I get it most?
No, you got it all.
Okay, good.
Thank you
all
so
right.
much.
Okay.
Thank you, Nathan. Next question comes from Brenda Bouchard.
Hi, Brenda.
Hi, thank you for being
Yes.
here. My husband passed recently after living with younger onset Alzheimer's disease for 12 years. Thank you. My mother has Alzheimer's, and my sister was diagnosed last summer. By 2050, it's anticipated that 14 million Americans will have Alzheimer's or a related dementia at a projected cost of $1.1 trillion in today's dollars. So what will you do to deal with this national public health crisis that is impacting all of us?
It is. And well, the first thing you want to do, especially, and I'm so sorry for your loss
Thank
and
you.
what you're experiencing right now and being a caretaker, I'm sure, and what you have seen and how hard it is. And so the first thing I think we need to do is to continue to work for a cure. That won't bring your husband back, and it won't bring your other family members back, but it is the right thing to do. And I have always been sponsors of and led some of the efforts to fund NIH research and to fund research across the country. There's been some very cool research being done actually at University of Minnesota and at Mayo. One of the things we've learned in our state, and I know Dartmouth has done some work on this as well, is that the sooner that you can detect Alzheimer's. At first that sounds, is that really an advancement? But it is, because then you can start figuring out what we can do and what's working and what's not working with these cures. So that's the first thing. As a sideline, when we were in the Ted Cruz-induced government shutdown, I gave my salary that I would have brought in to NIH for the research, because the research was being stopped to their foundation. The second thing is caretakers, and I think we should do more. As president, I would do more to help caretakers in terms of tax credits. There's so many of the caretakers that are having to leave their jobs or go part-time. There are caretakers that are in the sandwich generation. They have their parents they're taking care of, and then they still have kids. So that would be a big part of it as well. And then the final thing is a little more of the Alzheimer's Association has done such a great job with this. It's working with the community so they understand when people have Alzheimer's what that means. Because you still have people who are functioning, that are in their homes, that are going shopping, and we've done these great educational efforts around the country where people actually start understanding, how should I act if I'm a young kid as a clerk in a grocery store, a gas station, when someone comes in with Alzheimer's. And there's actual beautiful stories about how kids, even young kids, have changed their way they interact with people with that disease when they start to understand it. So that's one of the things that I love that's going on. It's a community effort at a time when our world is fractured around us with our politics. Those kinds of things are even important beyond what they do for the people with the disease.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Next question comes from Bess Mosley.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Senator.
Hi, Bess.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let me get this right. So I have my niece and nephew own an independent pharmacy. Do you have thoughts on how to prevent the CVSs of the country who own insurance companies from unfairly crushing independent pharmacies?
Very good. Well, I like competition. I think I've used that word a lot here today. And I like having independent pharmacies. We have the ones that I know, the pharmacists, they're almost like giving advice to people in the role of a medical advisor. So a lot of this is about just the consolidation we're seeing in general in our country. That is a major problem. And I believe that we actually have to do something about it. Interestingly enough, Donald Trump has talked about this, but he actually hasn't done anything about it. And there are things that we can do to make sure that we have small as well as big companies in this country. The first is that when we start having a lack of competition and monopoly power in any area, we should be able to look back at what happened and look at it again and have the people in place in the FTC and the Justice Department that are as sophisticated as these people that are proposing these mergers or moving in and shutting out competition. And the way you do that is with something called the antitrust laws. New Hampshire's a great place to care about antitrust laws because you are a place of a lot of small businesses. And when you have big companies come in and start limiting power, a great example, not in the pharmaceutical area, although there is a lot of examples there, is online travel. So you think you're getting a good deal? Well, one day, just check it out on the internet where they are. They're all owned, I think it's 90% of them are owned by only two companies. They just all have different names, Expedia and this. Waze, that's so cool, right? Well, Google Maps just bought them. And so then you stop having innovation and you certainly stop having a competition for prices and quality of service when you shut out a lot of these small businesses. And so that's why I've also proposed some changes to our antitrust laws and try to remind people all the time that this was originally Republicans that wanted this. Why? Because they wanted to make sure we had real capitalism that was strong. Sherman of the Sherman Act was a Republican senator from Ohio. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican. And so if this is about business and competition, we should be joining together to say there is too much big. When you're down to railroad, class 1 rail in this country that transports stuff to market, there are only 4. There used to be 63. 4 is the same number on the monopoly board, right? So I am not just saying every company is bad that's big. I've got a lot of big companies in my state that are very good. I just want to make sure that we have competition, that it's not screwing with consumers and it's not pushing out small businesses like your pharmacies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bess. Next question comes from Mary Kirstein.
Hi. So you've talked a little bit about your plans to update the infrastructure in the United States, and your campaign on a website has cited your involvement in getting funding for fixing the I-35 bridge as a sign that you can do this, that you can secure the funding. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that one of the things that contributed to the collapse of that bridge was a structural design flaw. So my question is, do you believe fast-tracking updates to our infrastructure and really making that a priority will actually increase the likelihood of having structural design flaws in new infrastructure.
Okay. Well, my infrastructure package is about funding infrastructure so this doesn't happen again. I use that as one example because it just happens to be 8 blocks from my house, and it was an 8-lane highway that literally went down in the middle of the Mississippi River on a beautiful summer day. 13 people were killed, and as I said that day, a bridge just shouldn't fall down in America, but it did. And so one of the issues is that we have a president in the White House that has on election night on, he said it on election night, said he wanted to do something about infrastructure. And we have not seen anything happen short of what Congress did before he got there. And yet we have bridges and roads with D ratings just this year from the Society of Civil Engineers. We have the Manchester Rail that I raised earlier, so I won't go into that. You've got schools that are crumbling in places like Baltimore, where they literally didn't have heat. You have water systems and sewer system. Ask the people of Flint. And that is why I've proposed this $1 trillion infrastructure package. I think it is really important that we don't just talk the talk and we show how we're going to pay for things. That is what I've done with this infrastructure package. And the 35W bridge was about a structural defect, as you point out, with that bridge that was done decades and decades before. And after that happened, the question is, what do you do? And what we did in our state, despite the resistance of the governor, is they went in and we have fixed a bunch of our infrastructure and went back in. And guess what? A few years later, we were voted the #1 place to do business by CNBC, in part because of the infrastructure. So I just saw that in my own state. I want to take that in terms of funding for infrastructure. I've showed how I'm going to pay for it, which is by taking the regressive parts of that tax bill we talked about, $400 billion from one part of it, $150 billion from another, do an infrastructure financing authority, making sure we have a carve-out for rural in there, which if you just put $25 billion federal money, a conservative estimate, you're going to get 300 matching from state and local because they've been waiting, and private, they've been waiting for that kind of money to come in. And then bonds is another way you can do this. So those are the ideas I have.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mary. We have time for just a little bit more here. And
Okay.
I'm curious, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your situation with your dad. So many people in New Hampshire and across the country have a family member who's dealt with addiction. Certainly I have. And you're torn between the fear of losing them, the love you have for them, and the anger of the situations that are provoked there. So you're clearly a very strong person. Was there ever a moment in that relationship when you thought you might walk away?
No, but that doesn't mean that for some families, especially for some people, when they have someone in their family with alcohol or drug addiction, it's actually not safe for them to stay around it, or the best thing may be to walk away for a while. In my case, it was pretty interesting because my dad got those DWIs when I was in middle school. He kept being my dad and seeing me. He kept doing his job, but at the same time, he told the world that he wasn't drinking anymore. When in truth, we would find the liquor bottles in the basement, or he'd be drinking out of the back seat of a car. So I just kept pushing him and pushing him. Then I went to college, I went to law school, I came back, and then when I saw it was still going on, I actually called his employer and said, would you help me, please? He was drinking this week, and it's so dangerous. And they said, well, no, he just celebrated his sobriety. I'm like, no. And so I feel like I tried everything I could, which a lot of families do. And then a year later, he got that 3rd DWI. And luckily, he actually didn't ram into anyone in a car or hurt someone else, but it easily could have happened. And in his own words, when he got that treatment, he was pursued by grace with his family and his friends and his faith and the community that came around him. And he is now at age 91 in assisted living. A few months ago, he told me, well, it's hard to get a drink when you're in assisted living. He was kidding. But in truth, his AA group still comes there to see him, which is a pretty cool thing. And so that is what's made a difference to him. And when you look at there's a few things going on here. One is that for drugs and alcohol and mental health. We have to do a better job of detecting it early and getting people the help and getting rid of that stigma. And that means counselors in school and things like that. The second piece of it is making sure that there's the beds. I talked about that before, we made that transition. And then the third thing is when people get out and they've recovered, that they are able to get a job. And the final thing is just pushing insurance companies with mental health parity to be able to cover things, because we've had a real issue with that. And one last thing of inspiration. Do you remember that both New Hampshire and Minnesota love the Winter Olympics, right? Do you remember that incredible cross-country ski race of the two women that weren't expected to win? One of them named Jessie Diggins from the state of Minnesota, and her ski just made it over the line, and they won the gold medal. And this was just in the last Olympics. Well, she actually overcame an eating disorder and won the gold medal. She said she couldn't even sometimes put on her cross-country ski suit because she thought it made her look fat, right? And anorexia is actually the #1 mental illness cause of death of women. And what I fought for there, working with a number of women senators, was to make sure we had parity and that we would be able to have beds for mental illnesses like anorexia as well. And so it was pretty cool. It wasn't because of me that she got that treatment. She got it before. But to hear her tell her story of how she won the gold medal after overcoming a mental health disorder like that, wow, anything and everything is possible. And that's why I believe so much in doing something about mental health and addiction.
That's all the time we have for Conversation with the Candidate. Thank you to the candidate, Senator Klobuchar. We appreciate your time here in New Hampshire. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to you folks watching Conversation at home.
All right.
We'll be back next week with Senator Cory Booker. Until then, have a great night.
Okay, thanks everybody. This was great.